Hey y'all, let's sew up some roller derby shorties. I'm doing some briefs, the brief cut here, but the construction is the same for the cheeky, the brief, or the shorties. And I'll talk about any differences there may be. This is my front piece and my two gusset pieces. I am using gray fabric. It's cotton spandex, so it's a little hard to see what is right sides and wrong sides. Right now, it doesn't really matter unless you have a lining piece. I use the same for main and lining here. So just sandwich them all at the front crotch seam and stitch all 3 layers together. If you're using a different lining to main, then you want to make sure your main gusset piece is right sides together with your main front piece. Then your lining gusset is going to be face down, right sides face down onto the wrong side of your main front piece. If you do it like that, then it will all flip out nicely and beautifully for you. This is a 3/8 inch seam right here. I'm using my serger, so I'm letting my serger cut off just 1/8 of an inch. You can also use whatever stretch stitch you like on your machine, and then just trim your seam allowance down, whatever you'd like. So flipping it right sides out. Here's my right side. It has the little black marks. I'm going to burrito roll my front piece down to this crotch seam and open them up. So this is right sides up. This top one is my main gusset piece. So I'm going to make sure the right side of my back piece is to the right side of this main gusset piece. I'm going to align those at the crotch and then flip over my other gusset piece to sandwich them just like we did on the front. The back piece and the front piece are kind of burrito rolled up in between them. And as you can see, I didn't take much time perfectly burrito rolling my back piece. There's enough room in this size large medium that I'm doing for myself that it's not necessary. But if you're finding your gusset piece is kind of small, to just throw it in there like I did, just roll it up like a burrito, just like you did on the front. So you have 2 little burritos in there. Again, we're just going to stitch this exactly the same, 3/8 inch seam allowance. The back seam is a little curvier than the front, so just make sure you're not getting any little gathers or bloops. Okay, now we're going to flip it right sides out. It's going to look beautiful on the inside and the outside. Here's the right side with my marking. We're going to start at the top corner on the front. I'm just going to mark with a pin this marking because once I put my fold over elastic on, it's going to cover up my marking and I still need that marking. I'm using 3/4 inch fold over elastic, which is my personal favorite. I think it's the easiest to work with. It's got a fold line down the center, just like this. If you're new to working with fold over elastic, I recommend you open it up, align your raw edge to that fold line, and then baste these two together all down. If you're like me and you've put on fold over elastic a million billion times, just gonna pin it sandwiched on. Again with that raw edge, butt it up against that fold line, and I'm just gonna stitch it right on. I do give fold over elastic measurements. What that measurement is literally just the measurement that is along the line of where you're gonna attach it. I do not make it smaller, I do not make it bigger. It is just that measurement exactly digitally. I don't really recommend using that measurement. I add them into the tutorial because I'm asked for them all the time. So I recommend adding it 1-to-1 just like I am and letting your fold over elastic lay how it wants to lay. Fold over elastic can vary quite wildly in how thin it is and how much spandex it has in there. This one that I have is fairly thin, but it is 3/4 of an inch. So it's gonna be a little bit more stable than, let's say, a 5/8 really, really thin one. There is 1 inch fold over elastic, which is gonna be even more stable. And then there's fold over elastic, which means instead of just a thin little piece like I have, it's actually elastic that has a fold line down the middle. That's usually what they sell at Joann's in the 1-inch fold over elastic. You can use that as well. I use that for my swimsuit because I wanted it really stable where it wouldn't move around. For my underwear, I definitely would pick something thinner like this. But with that being said, all these different varieties of fold over elastic all behave quite differently. So I really suggest getting the hang of just adding it by feel. It should be 1-to-1 is what I always say. You shouldn't be stretching it, but you shouldn't be easing it in, or definitely try not to stretch your fabric, which is what, if yours is coming out wavy at all, that means you are stretching your fabric. If you notice, I forgot to add my marking there. I had to cut the video there to go back to my pattern piece and add my marking. But this is how I always do my fold over elastic. I never have used a measurement. This is how my mama taught me, and it comes out beautiful every time. You might have to practice for a little bit on some scraps, but you want to get it to where you're not getting any waves. If you're getting waves, that means you're stretching your fabric as you're sewing it. You also don't want it to gather up. If it's puckering and gathering, you're tugging your fold over elastic too much. But you get that sweet spot of just adding it 1-to-1. Your pattern piece really shouldn't change shape at all. Now what we're going to do is we're going to overlap our top front edge with our fold over elastic to our raw edge on the back piece. So the back piece, you only do fold over elastic to that marking, and then you're going to leave it just knit from that marking up to the top edge. And we're just going to overlap these by 3/8 inch. So it's another reason why I really love using the 3/4 inch fold over elastic, is because now I have the perfect visual of overlapping 3/8 inch, because when folded in half, my 3/4 inch becomes 3/8, which is perfect for the overlap here. So if you used 3/4 inch elastic like me, then you just overlap exactly by your fold over elastic. If you used a different width, it can be really easy. Just go ahead and mark the 3/8 inch down that side seam with some kind of removable marking tool, and then align it there. See mine, that raw edge goes right to the fold over elastic on the inside. And then we're just going to top stitch along this folded edge of the fold over elastic to stitch it down. This is my favorite method for this kind of binded look. Some people like to stitch all of these layers together at once instead of doing the binding and then stitching it to the back. Personally, I think this comes out much more beautifully, much less finicky, and I just love the way it looks. So this is my favorite method, and I hope it's nice and easy for you too. You're going to stitch all the way down until it's no longer two layers anymore. And then we're just going to repeat on the other side. One thing I'll mention is it's nice to press your fold over elastic, but be careful because a lot of fold over elastic will scorch, burn, melt. So just use a pressing cloth, a lower heat when you press it, and you'll be okay. There's one side. Just going to repeat exactly the same on the other side. And then we're going to add our waistband. Doing an exposed elastic waistband here. It's my personal favorite. I add the knit waistband because I know people love the knit waistbands, but I love a cute elastic, a cute little underwear elastic. I can't ever pass it up. My favorite way to attach an elastic waistband is to go around using a basting stitch, so the longest straight stitch that your machine can do. And I go around the top edge using a 3/8 inch seam allowance with this basting stitch. I try to use a high contrast thread. You can't see it very well here, but I used like a royal blue, something that really stands out against my fabric. And then what we're going to do is we're going to use that basting stitch as a guide to align our elastic to. I've done it without the basting guide a ton of times, and it's just can be super difficult, especially with certain cotton spandex, which is my favorite for underwear. Cotton spandex is just the ultimate underwear fabric. What can I say? But other jerseys too. I know a lot of people like bamboo undies. They can roll really easily on the edges, and this just makes sure that you get it really nice and even. It makes it so much easier. Take the time to do it. Here's my cute underwear elastic. I get asked all the time where I get my cute underwear elastic. Etsy. I get my cute underwear elastic from Etsy. I just go searching on there, and I usually search underwear elastic, plush back elastic, soft elastic, things like that. We're going to butt the ends together, and we're going to use a really wide and a very short zigzag just down to connect these two. Make sure you have a stretch needle in. It's really important. Your machine is not going to want to sew through a thick elastic without a stretch needle in it. It's going to get stuck, and it's going to throw a hissy fit. You also can put holes into your elastic if you're not using a stretch needle as well. But that's it. Just make it into a nice circle. The waistband isn't super tight, so you don't need to be too crazy about making sure it's the thickest zigzag all the way down. You just want it to feel nice and tight, like it's not gonna come undone. I'm gonna mark it into even quarters using that seam right there. And then we're gonna do the same with our shorties. We're going to mark the top edge where we just did that basting stitch along the top edge into even quarter marks. The little fold over elastic that's on the front piece is definitely not the quarter point, so make sure you are marking your center front and center backs, which I always mark my center fronts and center backs when I'm cutting them out on the fold. I just find it really quick and easy. I highly suggest that little tip. It saves you time in the end, and it just takes 1 second to cut a little notch at the center front and center back when your pieces are already on the fold. And I know there's a movement in the projector world to have everything off the fold, and I'm very against it. I love cutting everything on the fold, and I love marking everything on the fold, so you guys will probably have to pry that from my hands. So now that we have all of our quarter marked, we're just going to align them, and we are going to overlap the bottom edge of our elastic right along that basted stitch line. Your elastic should be exactly the same circumference as your shorties or underwear bottom are. But since the elastic is much, much more stable than whatever you sewed your underwear in, it might feel like you need to slightly stretch your elastic to fit the underwear. In reality, they should be exactly the same if your seam allowances were followed perfectly, but you might feel like you're stretching your elastic just a little bit because it is much more stable than, cotton spandex, bamboo spandex, swim, whatever you happen to be using. It should be a very minimal amount, though, if you're feeling like you're stretching. I'm going to speed up this part right here. It's going to get a little bit boring watching me just pin the elastic along this marked basting stitch if I don't speed it up. Okay, now that we're all pinned, I'm going to use my regular sewing machine. I'm going to use a stitch called elastic stitch on mine. It's very similar to a triple step zigzag, except for instead of a zigzag, it gives kind of a wave. I also love a triple step zigzag for a high stretch top stitch on my machine. You can also use a cover stitch machine if you are lucky enough to have one. The only thing here is make sure you're not stretching your fabric as it's gonna sew through. If you're using something like a triple step zigzag or this wave one, it's a slower stitch. And if you're like me and you're used to going pedal to the metal speed and you like going super fast, you're gonna have to mentally prepare that it's going to be slow. It's a slow stitch. And if you try to rush it through your machine, it's going to stretch out your fabric and it's going to mess up the timing on your machine. So let your machine take its time and do the stitch. The reason why it's so slow is because it has a ton of little stitches in between and goes through the zigzag or wave, and that's what gives it a ton of stretch. So let it take its time and do this awesome stitch for you. Again, I'm going to speed it up just a little bit because I'm just going to be going around this waistband nice and slowly. Like I said, if you can see, it does look like I'm stretching just a tiny bit to fit the bottoms. And again, that's because the elastic is so much more stable than my shorties material. Okay. I do highly recommend having your elastic on top and your fabric on bottom, because that will help the feed dogs kind of help you ease in the fabric to the elastic. Now you can remove that basting stitch. It's really quick on a knit. You just kind of stretch it a little bit, pop a couple threads, and then pull out from your basting thread. And it should come out really easily since it's only through one layer of fabric. If you picked a contrasting color like me, it should be super easy to kind of find and grab. I definitely recommend taking the time to do that. It's well worth the time it takes to baste it and then take it out. You'll get a beautiful, nice, even elastic band every time with this method. Once you're done taking out your basting stitch, you can trim any extra seam allowance you have. Depending on what stitch you used, you could have used up almost all of your seam allowance, or you could have some extra seam allowance that you want to trim off. I always have my little front and back notches that I need to trim off. So I always trim those off at least, and then depending on my stitch, sometimes I'll go around and take off a tiny bit more as well, just so it's not rolling and making a little thick seam allowance area on you. All right, we're all done with our roller derby shorties. I really hope you love yours. They're a quick, easy sew, and I can't wait to see everybody's. Don't forget to share with me if you sew them up. Bye, y'all.